At the time of my encounter, I lived in a beachfront home in Oregon, which is strategically located on a high elevated bank overlooking breathtaking whitewater views of the ocean and bay. Our Cape Cod-style home is situated on half an acre of land that is lushly landscaped with a beautiful terrace and yard with ubiquitous trees dotted haphazardly all over the place, giving the property a really authentic, natural feel about it. I was 18 years old at the time and really took living in this idyllic location for granted because I got used to the taste of the fresh, salty sea air on my tongue and the panoramic, spectacular views that I would see every day. That all changed when my 22-year-old cousin Sophie came to stay at our home for a couple of weeks. Sophie came from New York and was well used to the life of a city slicker, so coming to a coastal retreat like our home was her idea of absolute paradise. When I showed Sophie around our home, all she could do was stare out at the ocean views in awe. I could tell she was so absorbed by the stunning vegetation, the long stretches of soft white beach sand that were literally yards away from our home. However, what I believed enamored Sophie the most was the sparkling views over the ocean underneath a pristine blue sky and the soft crashing sounds of the waves as they rolled rhythmically towards the shore. "You do not know how lucky you are to wake up to this sensational view every day," she said. "What I would give to live in a place like this. Do you know how lucky you really are?" Sophie bubbled over with enthusiasm like an excitable puppy, and her rapturous delight over my amazing life was extremely infectious. "Oh," she gushed, "there is so much I want to do here. We must get up at the crack of dawn, just when the sun rises, and go for a long walk on the beach." When she said that, my heart sank. I began to feel a bit like the big, fat, elderly dog that lay in the corner sleeping all day, while Sophie was the excitable, enthusiastic puppy that wanted to experience absolutely everything that life had to offer her. I was beginning to think my cousin could become rather a handful for me on her holiday. I loved nothing better than to sleep in late until half the morning had already gone, but I could see Sophie would be pouncing on me early in the morning to go exploring, and that idea did not appeal to me. My family were delighted to see Sophie, and that night we all took her out to our favourite seafood restaurant, where we indulged in some of the local specialities which Sophie loved. "The best seafood I've ever tasted," she said. "It doesn't even taste fishy." My father laughed. "If your fish tastes fishy," he said, "then it's not fresh." "I did not know that," she said. "Is that true?" "It most certainly is," said my father. It was 4:30 in the morning, and I found myself being shaken by Sophie, who was eager to get me up as quickly as possible. I felt very annoyed. What time was this, I thought? Was my cousin completely bonkers? Was she stark raving mad? I closed my eyes very tightly and pretended to be fast asleep, and I even made a few snoring sounds to try and convince her that it was impossible to wake me up. Sophie did not give up. She was relentless. She shook me even more vigorously and pinched my arm so tightly that I let out a huge squeal. "Ouch!" "Wake up," said Sophie. "You'd be useless in New York. You are such a slouch." Now I was annoyed. "Sophie," I said, looking at my cell, "what time is this? It's still dark outside. Are you completely off your rocker?" "I want to go down to the beach and watch the sunrise," she said. "You have the ocean every single day, but I don't. I just want to enjoy every minute while I'm here, and I want to share it with you." "One day you'll thank me for it," she promised. "When will that be?" I asked sarcastically. "When you're old and grey, and maybe you're frail, and you'll look back on your life and say, 'Thank goodness I experienced those sunrises with Sophie. Now I can revisit that memory.'" "All right," I said begrudgingly. "I'm coming, but do not make a sound because my parents are fast asleep, and the last thing you want to do is wake up my grumpy father." I reluctantly got dressed and followed Sophie down the wooden steps of the large wooden deck that surrounded our home, that offered sensational all-round views of the magnificent ocean. This deck of ours was a favourite spot for my parents to entertain on, and we had enjoyed wonderful summers out here barbecuing meat over an open grill, all the while truly being able to appreciate the glorious views and the sound of the ocean waves, not to mention the amazing bird calls from the gulls gliding over the water with their long white wings. It was quite a breezy morning as we ventured out onto the beach. The white sand was cool on our bare feet. It was low tide, and so the sea had retreated further away from the beach, and we found ourselves walking on the wet, firm sand. It was still dark outside, but the outside lights from my house, including my torchlight, offered as much light as we needed. In the olden days, said Sophie, this was the time when smugglers would operate the deliveries of their stealth cargo from the sea to land. It must have been quite exciting operating all those secret missions under the guise of darkness. Just imagine. Sophie, I laughed, you do think about crazy things. Suddenly Sophie ran towards some footprints in the sand. I was stunned. Who was up and about so early, I wondered, as I observed the long trail of footprints that were clearly visible all down the beach. The footprints were absolutely enormous, and when I say enormous, I'm not exaggerating. I mean enormous. I would say they were 18 inches, and the person, like us, was clearly walking around barefoot, and only the angle of the toe on the foot looked strange. Otherwise, the feet were like ours, but much, much bigger. Look at these footprints, gushed Sophie with excitement, and look at the strides. They're huge. I kid you not when I say the person who has walked down the beach with these enormous feet must have been taking strides about 4.5 of our feet. You know how big you'd have to do that? Sophie and I looked at each other in horror. Who could this be, we wondered? Who has feet this big? Bigfoot, laughed Sophie. It's got to be a Bigfoot. Sophie, you get crazier by the minute, I laughed. Bigfoot does not exist. It's like that Loch Ness monster stuff in Ireland. In Scotland. It's a myth and a legend. I'm not sure that your dad would agree about that. What are you talking about, Sophie? I asked, looking bemused. Why don't you ask him, said Sophie. Let's just say your dad and my dad had an encounter with a Bigfoot once, but he never talks about it. Why not? I asked, feeling irritated that Sophie knew something that I didn't. Because of people like you that think Bigfoot is just a huge hoax. I never said that I was not open to having my mind changed, I argued. Well then, said Sophie excitedly, let's follow the footprints and see where they go. I grew hesitant. If Bigfoot is real, I said, what if he's dangerous? Don't be silly, laughed Sophie. We're not going to go up to him and say, hello there, Mr. Bigfoot. Hi, my name is Sandra. How do you do? Of course not. We will follow the steps and hide away so that he does not see us. But we want to see him. You know how many people would die to be in our shoes right now? I was not convinced anyone wanted to be in my shoes now, and I, for one, didn't want to be in them either. The idea of following these footprints gave me a huge sense of foreboding. I had never believed in Bigfoot before, but the idea of pursuing such a potentially unpredictable creature gave me the chills. If my father had seen a Bigfoot, then there had to be real. But why would he have not told me about his encounter? I wondered, why was there all this secrecy? I finally agreed with Sophie about following the fresh footprints in the sand, and that is what we did, and they seemed to just go on forever and ever, until finally they just seemed to stop in the middle of nowhere. Just like that. It was extremely weird. Unless, of course, I said, pointing to the rocky outcrop, he leapt onto those rocks and walked along there. That seemed like the only reasonable explanation for the end of the footprints. We had walked quite a way. Let's turn around and go home, I said. I really think pursuing this Bigfoot fellow is a little over the top, don't you? Suddenly we heard whistling. Did you hear that? Gasped Sophie, looking exciting. It has to be, looking excited. It's got to be Bigfoot, and he's coming this way. Quickly, run, hide, do something. He's coming. In that moment of mayhem and panic, we lost control of all our senses and just flattened our bodies onto the ground behind a large 5-foot rock, hoping with all our hearts that this creature would not see us. I want to say that chasing after a Bigfoot is exciting until suddenly you are facing a potentially real-life encounter. Then the excitement does wear off. That is when fear can take on a new level. It was a huge turnaround for me. I had never believed in Bigfoot, and now I was feeling a senseless feeling of overwhelming anguish. We could hear the footprints slapping against the rocky stones, and the creature continued to whistle happily to himself. I kid you not, the creature sat on the flat stone slab only yards away from us. It was the most thrilling and terrifying moment of my life at the same time. We peered over the top of the rock we were hiding behind and saw the creature squatting on 2 legs, looking up at the sky and whistling to himself. The creature was watching the sun rise and appreciating the beauty of it all. He continued to whistle, and then we saw him smashing something with a stone. It was a large crab, which he broke into pieces and sucked out its contents. The creature, squatting on all 4s, looked enormously big. From the back view, he was covered with fine hair. Even from the back, I could tell he was not a bear, because his hair was not as thick or dense as a bear's, and it was a sandy colour. I could also see those long arms and big hands. You could tell those arms were much longer than a human's arms would be. Finally, after finishing his little snack, the creature grunted with pleasure, like the satisfied sound you might make after indulging in a yummy meal. It was a sound of sheer contentment. The creature then stretched out his long body on the rocky outcrop and fell into a deep sleep. We could hear his heavy breathing and a snoring sound that sounded like irregular snorts. It was a funny sound, and even I found it hard not to burst out laughing. Sophie started to giggle, and I reached out and slapped her. "Shh," I whispered. "What if he wakes up?" The creature curled into a fetal position and turned around to face us, with his eyes closed. The creature was in a deep sleep, and so quickly too, I thought. Boy, I wish I could get to sleep that fast. This was the moment I will never forget. Close up and personal to a creature that did not exist according to the know-alls in our society, myself included. Now I was starting to doubt. Now I was staring at it without a doubt, and it was a revelation to me. Bigfoot was definitely real. The creature I was peeking at over the rock had a curved A-shaped head with a hairless, weathered face and deep furrows or ridges in the brow area. He had a tiny whiskey beard on his chin and a mole-like spot on his face. Just as I was peeking over at the Bigfoot, I noticed his nose twitched as if he was smelling something, and then, with that, he suddenly opened his eyes, and he was looking down on my eyes that had been peering up at him. He rubbed his eyes for a moment because I imagine he wasn't expecting to wake up with 2 human pairs of eyes staring down at him. I truly think he was surprised and shocked to see us, and I really did not know how to react. But neither did he, because we really thought the Bigfoot was out for the count. He was clearly a deep sleeper, but a light one too. The Bigfoot was not aggressive at all. Surprised, yes. Angry or hostile, no. He also was not afraid of us at all, but he did not waste any time on jumping up from his sleeping position onto his legs. Standing up, he was at least 6 foot tall and 4 feet wide. He had large shoulders, big biceps, and virtually no neck. He glanced over at us one more time with his curious, inquisitive brown eyes. I did feel those eyes were expressing an interest in us, but he was not comfortable in hanging around humans, that was for sure. We watched the creature walking away and turning around one more time, and then he was gone down the end of the beach until he became a black dot in the distance. For a good 10 to 20 minutes, Even Sophie just stood there staring in silent awe at this marvelous, wonderful but formidable creature. Finally, I was the one to break the long silence. Did we really see that, I asked? Or am I about to wake up from an incredible dream only to discover that my cousin did not wake me up at the crack of dawn, and I did not just see Bigfoot? It was a Bigfoot, said Sophie. Was he not the most beautiful thing you have ever seen in your entire life? She gushed enthusiastically. I would not describe him as beautiful, I laughed. I would say that he was the most intriguing and fascinating creature that I have ever seen, but beautiful, I think not. A little pongy too, laughed Sophie. He smelt like wet dog and cheesy sneakers. When we returned home, my mother was surprised to see us. I thought you girls were fast asleep, she said. Come and sit down. I'm making blueberry pancakes with maple syrup. I hope you like that, she asked. Oh, I love that. We sat at the table eagerly and wolfed down the pancakes hungrily. My mother looked at us in astonishment. Anyone would think you had not eaten for a month, she laughed. That sea air has really revved up your appetites. I needed the sugar badly, laughed Sophie, after what we saw. What did you see? Asked my mother, smiling. A Bigfoot, said Sophie. We saw Bigfoot. At that moment, my father entered the room, and as he heard Sophie saying Bigfoot, I saw my father growing as white as a sheet, as if he'd just seen a ghost. My mother roared with laughter. Did you hear that, Niall? She hooted. They saw a Bigfoot. They saw a Bigfoot. My mother's laughter revealed that she thought we were joking. She was so dismissive about what we had told her, and not for a moment did she believe it. You saw a Bigfoot? She laughed. My father was not so amused. You said you saw a Bigfoot, said my father, growing alarmed. Whereabouts? He asked. Oh, he was on the beach, laughed Sophie. We followed him. He was a real cutie pie, wasn't he, Sandy? I looked at my father's face. He looked as if he was about to explode. Do not joke about stuff like this, he said angrily. Those things are highly volatile, unpredictable, and extremely dangerous. Oh, please, Niles, laughed my mother. You sound as if you sound like a know-all. You sound almost as if you believe that Bigfoot's real. They're just winding you up, Niles, that's all. He has seen one, said Sophie with her mouth full of pancake. She pointed her fork at my dad. Tell them about your Bigfoot encounter you had with my dad. My dad looked at Sophie in horror. My brother told you about that? No, he just said that you both saw Bigfoot once and it was terrifying. That's all he told me. Well, he was lying to you, said my dad adamantly. And with that he darted out of the door, and I followed him like a devoted little puppy dog. He had entered the bedroom and was rapidly dialing his cell phone and pacing up and down the bedroom with a look of extreme anguish on his face. I stood by the wall and listened with my ears flattened against the wall. Why was Dad in such a state about this Bigfoot? I had never seen him behave in such a peculiar, standoffish way, and he had been so defensive towards Sophie, calling his own brother a liar. What was he in such a state about, I wondered. So your daughter knows about our Bigfoot encounter, said my father on the phone. Did I not tell you to never ever tell anyone about it? You betrayed me, he continued. Well, even if you did not tell her about our Bigfoot experience, you told her enough, and she's asking all these questions and making stories about seeing a Bigfoot on the beach. You bet it freaked me out, he said. I told her you were lying, and you must tell her that it was all a wind-up and that you were just teasing her. We can never tell anyone about this, understand, said my father, and at that he put down the receiver, looking extremely angry. I never got to hear what happened to my father with his brother, but I gathered enough information to know that my father had had a very traumatic Bigfoot experience, one that he would never ever reveal. Even a mention of the hairy man brought him out into a cold sweat. Sophie got a phone call from her dad telling her that he had lied about his Bigfoot encounter just to wind her up and tease her. But Sophie knew he was doing that to humour my dad. We both knew that. We decided to tell my dad that we had lied about the Bigfoot we had seen on the beach. I could see the huge relief wash over his face, and he said something like, "If Bigfoots were real, they sure would not hang around a sandy beach or an area like this." I do not know why my dad has sworn his brother to such secrecy about a Bigfoot encounter. Maybe he's afraid of the doubters and the skeptics. In truth, I am too, because one day I told a friend about my experience, and she keeled over with laughter and told me that I was a brilliant comic. So there you are. I'm not going to tell anyone about my encounter, and neither is Sophie. But why not in an anonymous letter? So whether you believe my account or not, that is my story. Sophie was right. When I'm old and grey, I will be grateful for my Bigfoot experience. And yes, he's as real as you and I. I hope you enjoyed my story. I just want to say that that was a really, really stunning story. And it does just prove how uncomfortable people are about talking about their Bigfoot encounters. And if you're one of those people out there, don't be afraid to get in touch and tell us your story, because your secret is safe with us. It's not going to be shared with anybody else, and you will remain anonymous. And goodbye until next time.